And here we are on the meaning of a fraction part 5, and we're going to talk again about how fractions show up on a ruler. In our video on part 4, we saw that fractions show up on a ruler in this way. We noticed that every inch we can consider to be a whole. So here's my one whole in this case. So on this diagram, my one whole thing is not a circle, not a rectangle, not a measuring cup, it's one whole inch. And in the video part 4, we saw that every one of those black lines on this ruler we can think of as being a line that breaks up this inch into, and if you watch part 4, you know that these black lines break this inch up into 16 parts. So we said every one of these little pieces, like this piece right here, is going to have a bottom number of 16, because 16 make a whole, and every single one of them would be 1/16 of an inch. In this video, we're going to look at how we can start bundling together those small parts, those 16ths, and break this inch not into 16 parts, but into a different number of parts. So we're going to bundle two of these 16ths together and call that part number 1. And bundle those two together and call that part number 2. And I'm just going to keep going. Bundle those two and call that part 3. Bundle those two, and that's a part 4. There's part 5. There's part 6. There's part 7. And there's part 8. Now, when I break it up this way, not looking at the black lines, but now looking at the red lines, the red lines that I'm drawing on top of, so really it's every other black line I'm paying attention to, because the middle black lines I'm ignoring because I bundled them. This inch is now broken into 8 parts instead of 16 parts. So the bottom number of any fraction that talks about a red piece on this ruler is going to end with an 8, just as any fraction that talks about a piece broken up by those small black marks is going to have a 16 on the bottom, because 16 make a whole. So if I looked at this line on the ruler, I know that this part right here, the part number 1, 8 of those make one whole, and that's 1 out of 8. This line right here, well, still 8 make a whole, and that's 2 parts. This line right here, well, still 8 make a whole, but now I've got 3 out of the 8. This line says 8 make a whole, I've got 4. 8 make a whole, I've got 5. 8 make a whole, I've got 6. 8 make a whole, and I've got 7. And when I reach the end and I've got all 8 parts, the fraction that I end up with is 8 over 8. 8 over 8 means I've got the whole inch. 8 on the bottom says 8 parts make a whole. 8 on the top says I have all 8. So when I bundle my 16ths together, I get eighths. Instead of it being broken up into 16 parts, it's broken up into half as many now, because I've doubled things up. So I've got 8 parts. Those are eighths of an inch. Now, if I can take 16ths and bundle them into eighths, then you're probably wondering if I can take eighths and bundle them into something else. So on the ruler that's on the screen now, I've got those red lines, just like we saw on the previous screen. Those red lines are breaking this ruler into 8 parts. But we're going to bundle those guys together. Here's the beginning of our inch. Here's the end of one whole inch. And now let's bundle those 2 eighths together and call this piece number 1. Let's bundle those 2 eighths together at piece number 2. Bundle those two 8s together, call that piece number 3. Bundle those together, call that piece number 4. Now notice I'm talking about bundling 2 8ths together, and the 8ths I'm talking about are the pieces that are separated by the red lines, because when I'm looking at the red lines there are 8 pieces to make a whole. But I could have said, let's look at all the black lines, and if I'm looking at the black lines, then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those black lines bundled into a piece. So I could say I'm bundling up 4/16 to make one part, or bundling up 2/8 to make one part. Either way, I end up with 4 parts to make a whole. That means any fraction that talks about one of these yellow pieces is going to have a 4 on the bottom. So if I'm talking about a line that comes to here, well, 4 parts make a whole. I've got 1. This line right here, 4 parts make a whole. I've got 2. This line, 4 parts make a whole. I've got 3. And this line, well, 4 parts make a whole, and I've got all 4, which means I've got the whole thing. Well, if I can bundle 16ths together in 2s and break the inch into 8 parts, bundle 8s together and break the inch into 4 parts, you might be thinking, can I bundle my quarters together and get something else? And you can. So let's see what happens when we do that. Here again is the beginning of our inch. Here is the end of our 1 whole inch. Here's quarter number 1, and we're going to bundle it with quarter number 2. There's the piece that comes from bundling those together. So I could say I just bundled together 2 quarters, or, remember the red lines, I could say I just bundled together 4/8, same thing, or I could say I just bundled together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could say I bundled together 8/16, 4/8, or 2 quarters. All of that ends up being the same thing, and I'm going to bundle that quarter with that quarter, and there's my part number 2. So the whole inch now has been broken into 2 parts. If I've only got this part at the beginning, so I've got this to bring me up to there, then 2 parts make a whole. I've got 1. If I've got both parts, so I come up to this line, 2 parts make a whole. I've got 2, which means I've got the whole inch.